Well, I guess when I say money, I mean data, right? Because for an attacker, the data is money, right?
Yeah,
And so
that's a good point. Yeah.
once the hacker downloads data, it's easy enough to sell it, and that becomes money very quickly. So, and of course, from the victim, the target's perspective, it becomes a lot of money because one, their users and their employees' data has been compromised, which means they now have to spend money to be able to mitigate that. They have reputational damage. So this right here, okay, is the payload, okay, that's coming from the previous build DWP payload right here. And so it's going ahead and posting this payload to the SharePoint server.
Hey everyone, it's David Bombal back with the amazing OTW. Great to have you back on the show. It's been too long.
Oh, David, thank you very much for having me back on the best cybersecurity and IT YouTube channel. I'm always appreciated and honored to be on your show.
It's great to have you here, and congratulations, man. New book. So I'm glad to see that this has come out now.
Thanks. It's been a long process, which should have been out a couple of years ago, but we finally got it out, and it's all updated for the latest versions of Kali. And a lot of things have changed in Debian and Kali in the intervening years. So we've updated the book and put a few new exercises and information in there, as well as put a chapter in on using AI in cybersecurity.
That's great. So for everyone who's interested in learning Linux, a really important topic if you want to become a hacker. OTW, you're a strong believer in that, I know. Have a look at this book. Have a look at the reviews on Amazon, one of the best-selling books on Linux. Also, have a look at this book from OTW, Network Basics for Hackers, as well as getting started becoming a master hacker. OTW, you've also got Python for Hackers coming out soon, I hope. No pressure.
Yes, it's coming out this fall. Working on it as we speak, and hopefully it'll be out. It's scheduled to come out in September. We're still shooting for that date, and if not, might just be a little bit late. But the most important thing is to come out with a great book instead of meeting particular deadlines. So there's a possibility it might be a little bit later than September, but not much.
Really glad to hear that, because I know a lot of people are looking forward to that book as well. But OTW, what's happening in the news? I've read so many things about SharePoint. I believe there's a Zero-Day, and I also believe you've got a demo that you can share. So perhaps you can take us on the journey, what's been going on, and talk about the demo.
Yes, well, one of the things that's happened in real time right now is that the SharePoint servers around the globe are being attacked. There's been a number of different exploits, Zero-Days that have been out there, and the folks who are running SharePoint are in scramble mode right now, trying to keep their systems from being compromised. This is one more exploit, one more vulnerability and exploit against SharePoint, and it's a serious one. It's one that basically the attacker can bypass authentication, and then once they bypass authentication, can use a deserialization vulnerability to run their own code in SharePoint. One of the other things that's kind of interesting about it's a vulnerability that applies to all of the recent and the old SharePoint. But the old SharePoints are not being patched. So 2010, 2013, Microsoft is not patching those. So if you're running those in your organization, you're going to have to do something else. You're going to either have to upgrade or use some other mitigating controls on that system. So this is a very serious exploit. I've got a copy of a POC. Okay, what are the POCs? There's a few proof of concepts out there. Of course, the attackers have been attacking this as we speak right now, for over a week, about 10 days or so. And they've been attacking primarily government SharePoints. Right? So it looks like it's Chinese attackers, Chinese APT, attacking government SharePoints and then taking control. And then even after the vulnerability is closed, it doesn't mean necessarily that the attackers are out. So you can close a vulnerability, but they're still inside your system. So this is pretty serious. And if you're running the old versions of 2010, 2013 SharePoint, then what happens is that you don't have any patches whatsoever. So, folks, this is real important. And what I'd like to do at this point is to talk about what a deserialization exploit looks like, okay, what it is, and then show you the real exploit and how it works. So in a lot of applications, especially in web applications, we have this process that's called serialization. Serialization basically takes input data and then converts it so that it can be transferred to other applications. And so it takes a bunch of data and basically serializes it, puts it into a long string, and then passes it to something like JSON or other applications that can use that data. So there's a process of serializing the data, right? That's taking the data and basically making it into a long string. And then there's deserialization that takes place inside the application. Now, if the attacker is able to put data into the serialized data, for instance, shellcode, right, then what happens is that when it's deserialized, then the result is that you get remote code execution. You get a shellcode running inside of the application. Now, this has been a problem for a long time in a lot of applications, particularly in Java applications. Those of you who've been around the industry remember there was the Apache struts deserialization. Probably the one that had the most impact previously was that in the Oracle. In Oracle's middleware, their Java middleware, there was all kinds of deserialization problems. And Oracle databases run the world, right? Oracle databases run all of the major financial institutions, the big corporations, what have you. So this was a really serious vulnerability and exploit. Back, I think it was like 2017, 2018. Somebody check me, tell me if there was one in the Apache one was in 2015. So it was about the same time that we had the deserialization problem with Java in Oracle's applications. So the important point I wanted to make here is that when applications serialize data, it's possible to put in remote code, okay, put in a shellcode inside of that data. If it's user input data that's then serialized, then at the deserialization process inside the application, that shellcode can then be executed as it's deserialized. Most applications try to sanitize the input when it comes in, but in reality, it should be sanitized before it ever goes in, before it's ever serialized. So most applications do a sanitization process after it's deserialized. That's too late. It has some sanitization process at the input level. And that's the primary problem here with the SharePoint application, is that it allows the serialization process to take place witut any sanitization. And then when it passes into the application, it's then deserialized, and it's too late then to be able to check for what is it? What did we serialize? What is it we serialize? Oh my God, we serialized shellcode. Well, too late now. And so this is a process that we see at a type of vulnerability we see year in and year out. And it's not just Microsoft. It's Oracle, it's Apache struts, it's many different processes. If you just look at the CVE database for deserialization vulnerabilities, you'll find lots and lots of them. So what I wanted to do now is to show you the process of deserialization and in a proof of concept of basically a 0-day, all right, of this SharePoint application. So let me open it up.
At the time of this recording, it's still raging, right? I mean, there's malware being implemented, stuff. Sorry, go on.
It's still raging. It's as we're speaking right now, it's raging across the globe because SharePoint is largely used in organizations large organizations, medium to large organizations. It's a way of sharing information, sharing data. And so once the attacker gets inside of the SharePoint, they can pivot to other applications. So it's not just limited to SharePoint. Once I'm inside, once the attacker is inside your application, then they can pivot to any of the applications that are connected to SharePoint. And that can be, your user database. It can be your employee database. It can be a number of different things. And so this is a very serious application, very serious vulnerability and exploit. And companies around the world are scrambling to be able to mitigate this. Those people with the older versions of SharePoint, they're out of luck. Microsoft is not putting out a patch. It also should be pointed out that this is actually an exploit of a patch. Microsoft put out a patch for this a couple of months ago, and this is an exploit of the patch, right? And so it's somebody didn't do their job at Microsoft properly, and so we've got another exploit. One other important point about this particular exploit is that Microsoft, so in the US and in other countries as well, but the US is what I know best, there is a effort by cybersecurity organizations to share information. So if I'm Microsoft and I see a vulnerability and an exploit, or somebody's informed me of one, what I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to share that information with other companies. So, okay, hey, I've got this vulnerability, and I need to let you guys know that this is a serious problem, and you need to do something about your systems. So this is a government sponsor, a government corporate partnership of sharing information. Microsoft thinks that somebody in that group that they shared the information with spilled the information to APT hackers, right? So
wow.
As soon as they shared it, immediately it started getting attacked, right? So this is kind of an important piece of the whole picture of this particular unique application's unique vulnerability, is that it might be the information sharing process itself that is flawed. And one of the things that people have mentioned, but I guess I'm a little bit reluctant to mention this, but I will anyways, and you guys can do with it whatever you want, that Microsoft pointed out that there are two Chinese companies within this information sharing group, and they have implied that they may have shared the information with hacker groups in China. But that's a whole nother issue, right?
That's a whole
that's a whole nother issue.
That's a can of worms, yeah.
Yes, a big can of worms. All right. So this is let's take a look though. Probably more importantly for most of our viewers is that how does this exploit actually work? Right. Here's a proof of concept, and you can see that it's a Python script, which I should point out is most of the exploits, okay, are written in Python. And that's one more reason why everybody who's in our industry should learn Python. And that's a plug for my book.
I like that.
Everybody should know Python, just like everybody should know Linux, right? Everybody should know Linux. Everybody should know networking. Everybody should know Python. Now, it's not just Python, but Python is like 90% of all the applications that are used for cybersecurity. So let's take a look at this. All right, we've got those of you who know Python. Right, these are all the dependencies that are being used. You can see the imports are all being lined up here. We could go through all of them, but that's not. It's probably more than what most people want to know. What I want to really do is to go to, there's a function down here, okay? Here's creating a session. Here's the function that creates a session, all right? So basically it's going ahead and creating a session on the SharePoint server, and there's a normalization of URL. And one of the things that you note here is that there's a user agent, a unique user agent that's created here, and then it attempts to normalize the URL. And then there's another function, detect SharePoint, okay? And then the next function is to extract the site client tag, right? And then there is build the DWP payload. This is the key part, okay? Build the DWP payload. And what this is doing is it's creating the payload that's going to be serialized and then deserialized, right? I also should point out that this attack is actually two parts. It's actually two vulnerabilities being exploited. What's happened is that there's a authentication bypass, right? And then there is the serialization, deserialization, right? Both of those, this particular exploit does both of them, right? And so what we want to do is to go down a little bit farther on this exploit. Hopefully you can see it still. Well, you see a couple things I want to show you here is that it's using regex, okay, to be able to find the site client tag. Another thing that you should know, right, is regex. If you don't know regex, it's a way of being able to filter or filter text primarily. And that's what this is doing here. And then here's the payload being built. Okay. And then we want to go, well, there's actually a version extraction, but what we want to do here is look at the exploit. Okay. Let's take a look at that. So this right here, okay, is the payload, okay, that's coming from the previous build DWP payload right here. And so it's going ahead and posting this payload to the SharePoint server. This is the serialized, deserialized process, right? So this is probably the most important part. There's lots of things that are going on here, but there's a couple other things I want to point out. Is here's the layouts, the toolpane, right? This is called the toolpane exploit, by the way. So toolpane was actually the patch that Microsoft put out, I think it was in May. And so this is actually an exploit of that patch, right? And so here's the, this is going ahead and parsing the URL here, the target URL, and then it's going down and posting. This is the payload that was built in this exploit here. This is the payload that includes the serialized data, the compressed and serialized data. It delivers that to this URL here, right? This is the URL it's delivering it to. It sets the header, okay, right here. And what happens is that it sets the header. What this particular SharePoint does is that it basically tracks the state of the user by the header, okay? And this is what it's doing, is it's setting the header to sign out. See that right there? So this is kind of a really, how would I put it? It's a lazy way of tracking state. It's a lazy way, and that's part of the reason that this is vulnerable. It's a lazy way that somebody at Microsoft made a mistake, and then it goes ahead and posts this payload to that particular URL. And if it gets a 200, then the exploit is delivered. And then if it gets anything other than a 200, as you know, a 200 says that it's a successful connection, right? So whenever we go to a website, you know, there's these codes in HTTP, there's 200 is success. We all know that, you know, the 400s are not success. And so if it sees a 200 right here, if status code returns 200, then it says exploit was delivered. Otherwise, unexpected status code, exploit failed, all right? So those are the main portions of this exploit, this proof of concept. But the important part, probably the most important thing, is one, it goes ahead and finds SharePoint servers, right? That's what happens up in these earlier here. So detect SharePoint. It goes ahead and extracts the client site tag here, and then it builds the payload. This is basically building a payload that's going to get passed. It's going to be passed to the server, which when it's deserialized, it's going to allow us to run our own code on this server. So then the exploit goes ahead and it looks for this URL right here, and then it sends a post to with this payload that's been generated up above, and then it sends that, and then this gets passed through the serialization process and then the deserialization process, and voila, we have a shellcode on the other end of the SharePoint server, Once I have shellcode on the other end of the SharePoint server, then I can traverse that entire network, because remember that SharePoint is shared. That's the whole point. It's shared by many, many systems, right? And as the attacker gets inside the SharePoint server, it can pivot to any one of those other systems that are using SharePoint, which makes it really, really difficult to extract, to find, and then two, to extract once you find it. Okay, so just kind of as a good example of an excellent Python script to be able to write your own zero-day. What this particular person did is that they looked at the vulnerability and understood what was happening with the vulnerability and wrote this script. I wish that I could say that I wrote it, but I didn't. I simply got it off GitHub. There's 2 or 3 of them on GitHub that work pretty well. This is one of them, and so I want to give the fellow who wrote this credit. Let me just
definitely. OTW, have you tested this in a lab or somewhere?
I have tested it, and it does work.
OTW, I know that it's like our camera hacking videos and other videos. You can do this on real stuff, and unfortunately, we can't demo that on YouTube. But I'm glad to hear that you've tested it and it works in like your lab or wherever you tested it.
Yeah, it does work. And there's this particular one is written by a fellow who goes by the name of Sultan Ali Zero. And there's another one on GitHub by Mohammed Wasim 29. Both of those, the one that's by Mohammed Wasim is simpler. It's a more simple, streamlined, not quite as complex as this one. So either one of those work, right?
It's amazing that this one's only like 140 odd lines of Python code, that it can be such a serious problem.
Right. It's pretty simple. It's pretty relatively simple. You said 140 lines. It doesn't take much. The key parts are building the payload. Well, I guess the key parts are finding the SharePoint servers, identifying the SharePoint servers, making sure that they have one of the vulnerable versions, and then creating the payload, all right here, and then sending that payload to the proper URL. Okay, you can see it right here, the toolpane.aspx, and posting the payload that we built up above to that particular URL, and then it allows that data to pass right into the application without ever being detected.
Now, I've got to ask you the question, right? Because this is YouTube, and you and I have had many discussions of YouTube versus real world. A lot of people might say, well, you shouldn't be using Microsoft, and who uses SharePoint? But I'm assuming we're talking about lots of companies, right?
Oh, yeah. There's lots of companies. I mean, there are a lot of companies who, well, first of all, let's be clear. Microsoft is the biggest software company in the world, right? Not everybody uses it, but a lot of people do it, particularly in the corporate environment. People all use Microsoft, right? You and I use Linux, what have you, but in the corporate world, Microsoft is the standard everybody uses. Not everybody uses SharePoint, but a lot of companies do. And once they do, and this is a way for them to be able to share lots of data across the whole corporate infrastructure. If they're using it, right now, they're scrambling to be able to mitigate and patch this particular vulnerability. And the problem, of course, as I said, is that if they're already been hacked, putting a patch on is like closing the door after the horses have already been released, right? So once they're inside your system, it's a lot bigger job to get them out, right? Once they're inside. So you can patch a system, and that'll keep any new people from coming in. But once somebody's inside your system, it's a big job to trace them and find them and then eliminate them from your system. So there's a lot of companies right now around the globe who are scrambling to be able to mitigate this particular vulnerability. Now, and they're largely big companies, which means there's a lot of money at risk.
Yeah, exactly. And data.
Right? Well, I guess when I say money, I mean data, right? Because for an attacker, the data is money, right?
Yeah,
and so
that's a good
once
point.
once the hacker downloads data, it's easy enough to sell it. There's lots of places to sell the data, and that becomes money very quickly. So, and of course, from the victim, the target's perspective, it becomes a lot of money because one, their users and their employees' data has been compromised, which means they now have to spend money to be able to mitigate that. They have reputational damage. Where their reputation has been damaged, you say, "What do you mean my data has been compromised?" As I'm your customer, right? I'm working for some big banking organization, and I have to tell my clients, my customers, that their data has been compromised. Well, that's not going to go over real well. That's going to lose you some customers.
Exactly.
It's going to cost you a lot of money, right? And we're talking not about $1, $10, thousands. We're talking about millions, and maybe even tens of millions of dollars in damage. So oftentimes when a company announces that they've been compromised in this way and that their customer data has been compromised, if they're a publicly traded company, means that they're traded on the stock markets. It's not unusual to see these big company stocks drop by billions of dollars. I can remember in the Target hack back in whatever it was, the value of Target's is a big retailer in the United States. The Target hack cost Target in the neighborhood of $5 to $10 billion in their stock value once that was revealed. So companies who are vulnerable to this, maybe in some serious scramble mode. It's time to upgrade your cybersecurity. it's time to start figuring out what the heck happened to us in the last week, right? So this may be exactly what happened to many of these companies, and they're going to be scrambling for a while to try to extract the attackers from their system, because it could be, by now, they could be anywhere in your system.
And the problem is it's ADPs, right? It's not just some, single
hacker.
These are like hardcore guys.
This is not a script kiddie in a mother's basement, right? This is APT.
Exactly.
This is Chinese APT, largely from what I've been told. And so that means they're pretty sophisticated attackers. That means they're going to be doing a good job of hiding themselves in your system and building in back doors that they can go ahead then and exfiltrate your data.
OTW, as always, thanks so much for sharing, your thoughts on stuff like this, and also having, the code so that we can look at what the zero-day code looks like. I wish we could have demoed this, but obviously for YouTube, we're going to not do that. But thanks for sharing that you've actually tested it in your lab or wherever. OTW, as always, thanks so much for sharing, and teaching people how to be more secure and how to improve their lives by studying.
Yeah, I think you're very welcome, David. I just wanted to point out a couple of things before we leave, and that is, as everybody knows, and of course, first of all, these types of attacks are going to happen continuously. They happen continuously.
Yeah.
If you're in the cybersecurity industry, these things are happening every day. This one is getting a lot of press right now, but it happens daily, right, around the world. And so one of the things you need to do is be aware of these types of attacks that are out there. So you've got to keep your eye out to see, what the latest CVEs are, what the new exploits that are taking place are, to be able to protect your organization. The other thing I want to point out is that AI is coming very quickly. We all know, right? It's happening very, very quickly. And so it's going to be a threat, and it already is a threat, to low-level jobs, right? So the low-level jobs in our industry are quickly being replaced by AI. We're going to see a lot of that taking place over the next year or two, maybe sooner. And so this is why people should be watching your channel, right, to be able to learn every day new things, because this is going to keep you ahead of the AI. If you are static in what you know, in your knowledge base, AI is going to replace you. If you are ahead of the AI, you're always learning every day, learning new stuff. You can stay ahead of the AI and then therefore maintain your status in the industry and grow in the industry and advance in the industry. So that's why it's so important to watch channels like David Bombal's to learn every day. You need to be studying every day to be able to stay ahead of what the AI can do. And the AI can do a lot of simple stuff right now. And we're seeing that simple stuff being replaced by AI clients. And so my advice to everybody is to try to learn something new in cybersecurity every day.
And I think we should get you back, OTW. Just for everyone who's watching, we had some offline discussions. It'd be great to get you back, perhaps talking about AI and doing a demo of AI and how it can be leveraged, but also quantum. It'd be great to get you back to talk about quantum and how it's going to affect cryptography.
I think that's a real important issue, that quantum computers, quantum cryptography is happening. It's going to happen pretty soon. Although it's probably quantum cryptography and quantum computers are probably 5 to 10 years away in commercial applications, but APT is going to have them sooner, like 2 or 3 years. And then what happens when APT has quantum computers? That means that all of our cryptography is going to be vulnerable. So as listeners know, is that things like RSA, okay, RSA is no secret what the algorithm is. It's very computationally expensive. It means that it takes a lot of computing power. But once you apply quantum computers to RSA gets broken in a matter of seconds, right? And so this is going to wreak some havoc in our industry. And that's what I want to talk next about.
Yeah, look forward to it. So everyone who's watching, put your comments below, other topics that you want OTW to cover. Look forward to that next one, OTW. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David. See you soon.